Hello and welcome in this video where we are going to build our very first backend API together. No fluff, no complicated theory, just a clean practical introduction that will get you up and running fast. If you are a front-end developer or an app developer who's always relied on someone else to build the backend for your project, today that's going to be changed. We'll walk you through setting up basic server, defining API endpoint, and making your front end talk to your backend. By then, you'll have working API and the confidence to start integrating into your own project. If you are never written a line of backend code before, don't worry. I'll guide you every step of the way. Alright, let's dive in and build your very first backend API. We are building the web API for our expense manager app, the screen where user will enter their expense. Let's quickly walk through what field we are including and why. First up, expense type. This will let the user select whether it is an expense, income, or maybe even a transfer. Next, we have date field, so user can record exactly what the transaction happened. Then there is account. This is where the money came from or went to, like bank account, cash, or credit card. After that, we have category. Think of this as tagging the expense like groceries, transport, or dining out. Of course, we need the amount, how much money we have spent or earned. Finally, we included a note or description. This helps user to add any extra detail. Let's get started setting up our backend. We are going to use Spring Boot to build a solid and modern backend API for our expense manager. Let's head over to spring.io. This is official Spring initializer where we can quickly bootstrap our project. Let's give it our app name and let's add some required dependency. So Spring Boot we use to create RESTful API. Next, Spring Boot Activator to monitor our app health. Spring Boot Validation to validate inputs. Let's generate and download. Once it's download, let's open it in our IntelliJ and let's start working on it. Alright, we are inside IntelliJ IDE with our Spring Boot project open. If you are using other IDE, that's totally fine. Just make sure Kotlin and Gradle support is set up. Let's start with our main function. Just like any other Kotlin application, this is where applications start. Next, let's take a look at our build.gradle. This is where we manage dependencies and plugin. These are dependencies that we pick while we creating project. Similarly, we have plugin which enable Kotlin support and Spring Boot capabilities. Now let's write our very first hello world endpoint. To create endpoint, we have to create a controller in Spring Boot app. A controller in Spring Boot is a class that handle HTTP request and define how your application respond to those requests. You can think of it as a bridge between the front end and the back end logic. For example, here we have created a get endpoint which will receive get request and return response in string format. Let's open Postman and test it. Let's add our endpoint IP address and port number where our application is running on. And here we go. We got our first response, that is hello world. Next, we are diving into something really important when working with API, and that's DTO request. DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. In simple term, it's just a plain object that we use to send or receive data. When making API calls, think of it like a container that holds only the data you need. Nothing more, nothing less. This helps keep your data clean, organized, and secure. So based on our requirement, here this is our DTO. Now let's go ahead and create a new endpoint to save an expense. This is going to be our second endpoint, and for now we'll keep it really simple. All we want to is display the request that we have received. Alright, let's switch over to Postman and test our new endpoint. I'll send a request to the save expense endpoint, passing in the required data using our DTO, and voila, we got a response back. So our DTO is ready and it's working fine with our API. But here's the thing, right now it's wide open. There is no validation happening. Whatever data we pass, whether it is valid or not, the controller just go ahead and process it. And that's not ideal. Let's take an example. If we pass an invalid value for expense type like 0, the request still go through. The system just accept it, no question asked, and that could lead bad data entering over our system. Let's fix that. We'll use validation decorator to make sure that only valid value are accepted. Let's test this now. I'll start sending expense type as 0 and boom. We get a 400 bad request. That's exactly what we want. Now let's do the same for account category and amount. If I send a negative value, we'll get validation error. Now take the date field. Earlier, if we sent an empty string, the request would still go through. So let's fix that too. I've added a validation here. One to make sure the field is not empty. Now on try sending an empty date, we'll get 400, and that was our objective. Now date is fixed. Now we have few more problem. While sending random date, it's still showing result, but it should validate whether date is proper or not. Similarly, if we don't pass some required key, request still processing. Let's put some validation for that too. To handle that, we are going to use a JSON property required true, annotation on each required field. Now let's test this. I'll send a request without the expense type key, and yep, we get a validation error. That's how we ensure clients can't skip important field. Now let's handle the issue of user passing random value into date field. Right now, if someone send some random value, API will still accept it. To solve this, let's create a utility function to check if date string is actually a valid date. Inside our controller or service, we'll call this utility and throw an exception if the date is not valid. Let's test this. Now, if I send some invalid value for date, we get a clean error message. Similarly, on passing correct data, our request is getting processed. Next issue related to optional field. As we can see, notes and description are optional field, but if we are not passing them, we are getting error. It's due to these two fields we didn't mark optional explicitly. Let's change it type to nullable and we get our desired response. Alright, we are almost done with our save expense API, but there is still one important piece missing. Right now, when validation fails or something goes wrong, we just get a generic error, maybe a 400 status, or maybe some default string error, but not clear message telling us exactly what went wrong. Look at this. We get an error code, but it doesn't say which field is invalid or what the problem actually is. That's not helpful for the client or front-end developer. To fix this, we are going to use something called controller advice. In Spring Boot, controller advice is a special class that lets us centralize our error handling. Instead of writing try catch block everywhere, we can handle exceptions globally and return nice clean structure error response. Let's implement our global exception handler that will process invalid input, especially when using the validation library. Let's test it out. I'll send a request with an invalid input. And look at this. We now get a clean error with field specific message. Now with just one controller advice, we have massively improved the developer experience of our API. Instead of confusing error, we now give clear actionable message, and that's make an API truly production ready. Similarly, other error like missing required field. We are not getting much detail about what is exact issue. To resolve this, we can add another advice which capture if required field is missing and display message accordingly. As we can see, here is our result. For date also, as we already added required error handling, but when we pass wrong invalid date, we are not getting clear detail what is exactly issue. To provide clear detail, let's create a custom exception and map it to advice. And that's all. We have officially completed our Save Expense API. From setting up the DTO, adding powerful validation to handle errors, using global exception handling. We made sure the API doesn't just work, but that it responds with clear helpful message, even when things go wrong. And that's what make your backend production ready. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in next one. Until then, keep coding, stay curious, and build awesome APIs.